Alright, welcome ladies and gentlemen to the Scream Stream Night 2. I greatly appreciate you guys coming out to watch this. This is something that is a little different than what I normally do. But here in the Scream Stream, we basically are going to be doing things as of, well, I guess you can say, reading creepypastas and narrating stories and enjoying them together. So I greatly appreciate you guys joining me on this journey of bringing you nice terrified scares. I was previously reading a story. I was streaming like 10 seconds ago. My stream totally cut out on me, but I want to reread this story. I'm going to do for you guys. It took me a little bit. It was actually giving me some chills, and we'll start the stream up. So enjoy this intro. Alright, welcome ladies and gentlemen to the Scream Stream. First story we're going to start out with tonight is Blindness. Now this story, like I said, I was reading a tad bit of it earlier in the stream, but it cut out of me. I don't know, my internet is still shitty, but this goes out, this is credited to Moonlit Cove. So this is actually a really incredible story. It gave me really bad chills, so you guys might actually like this, and I hope you enjoy my narration, and we'll just have to see how it goes. Welcome to the stream, guys. I'm gonna be narrating this, and this is Blindness. It's true what they say, that when a person goes blind, their other senses heighten in order to compensate. Knowing that, thinking about everything that happened to me, I still can't come to rational conclusion of how these events unfolded around me without my knowledge. Granted, I couldn't actually see any of it happening, but I never suspected anything of this magnitude when judging solely on the minor oddities that I had experienced. Sure, every once in a while I would hear noises, but my house was old, and it seemed to have a mind of its own. All of its pops, creaks had become familiar to me as navigating its interior without the benefit of sight. Even when things turned to more bizarre, I always found a way to rationalize them away. Looking back, I asked myself, how could I have been so, well, for lack of a better term, blind? My mother had tried to convince me not to move into a house alone. Sarah, a young blind woman, shouldn't be living all by herself, she said. But I wanted to. I needed to. I needed to prove to myself that I was strong enough to do it. Besides that, as a 24-year-old, I didn't want to live with my parents forever, and I sure didn't want to wait around for the nice man to marry and move in with. That may never happen. Having lost my sight at a nearly early age due to a freak accident with industrial strength cleaning chemicals, I knew all too well the nuisances of learning to create a mental map of my surroundings. When I first moved into the house, I used my cane exclusively. I waved it back and forth in front of me with every step I took. I knew roughly where all the furniture was, since I was the one that directed the movers on where to put everything. I employed the cane for nearly a week, using its tip to develop a mental image of the layout. Learning the process was slow and clumsy at first, but I eventually got to the point that I was able to shed my cane after several days and begin walking cautiously with arms extended. I progressed further and became more familiar with the territory that by the end of the first month, I was able to walk freely without the use of my cane, or arms, or any other aid. I became quite adept at moving throughout the house freely. Not only that, but the house was located in a somewhat urban area, which made it convenient to walk to any place I had need. The grocery was only 3 blocks away. There was a department store across the street from that, and a bank and a coffee shop just a bit further on. I got used to listening to the flow of traffic, the timing the lights in my head so that I would know when the walk and don't walk signals were lit. Occasionally, a kind stranger would offer to take my hand and lead me across. I would thank them, and we would part ways once we were safely on the next sidewalk. In those days, I was working from home, making phone calls to patients that had recently been discharged from the hospital. In essence, I was being paid by the hospital to administer surveys that were then used to improve their services. The hospital was kind enough to provide me with a laptop computer that contained several different voice command software applications. I spent my days transcribing the recorded phone calls by speaking the customer's answers into a microphone and having the data fields automatically populate accordingly in the program. The first odd event that I remember was on a particular day when I got up from my work desk for a lunch break. As I headed into the kitchen, I kicked an object in the middle of the living room floor. I heard it slide a short distance on the carpet. I knew that I hadn't left anything in the way of my path, as I had just been there about an hour ago, and there was nothing on the floor. I knelt down and patted around until I located the object, a book. By the feeling its braille title, I recognized it was a book on the national parks that I kept on my coffee table some 5 feet away. I didn't remember knocking the book off the table. I stood there perplexed. The longer I thought about it, though, the less frightening it became to me. I convinced myself that I must have simply forgotten about the knocking the book to the floor, and I must have stepped over it or next to it during my passes through the room. I returned the book to its place on the table and went about making my lunch. That night, while lying in bed, I heard a sound that came from the kitchen. It was almost entirely masked by the usual sounds of the pops and the creaks from the house settling, but I definitely heard it. Faint as it was a very light humming noise, so light, in fact, that the average person with enhanced hearing may not have heard it at all from this distance. I slowly got out of bed, listening intently, the sound increasing as I made my way down the hallway and through the living room. As soon as I passed through the threshold of the kitchen, into the kitchen, I knew what the sound was. It was the compressor motor on the refrigerator, and it was substantially louder than usual. I approached the appliance and found that its door was standing wide open. I eased it shut, and then the hum returned to a normal volume. What on earth? Did I leave this open? I questioned myself in a whisper. Maybe it didn't close all the way that last time I swung it shut, I thought. I returned to bed, but I had trouble finding sleep. My mind wandered and questioned, how could I have overlooked the fallen book and the open refrigerator door when they first happened? The next morning, I decided to have breakfast at Espresso Express, the little coffee shop up the road. They served excellent coffee, and you could also get a ham and cheese croissant melt that was simply to die for. That alone was worth the effort of showering, dressing, and leaving the safety of my house to plunge into the buzz of whizzing traffic, honking horns, and people clamoring on the sidewalks. On that morning, a gentle stranger helped guide me across the intersection just ahead of the coffee shop. I said thank you as they released my arm, but there was no response. He or she was lost in the shuffle of people on their cell phones, their conversations momentarily audible to me as they passed in front of me or behind me. The tiny sound of a bicycle bell alarmed me, and I felt the breeze left behind when the rider whipped past. I entered the coffee shop to a much more serene environment and enjoyed my favorite breakfast at a seat near the plate glass window. bathed in the sunlight that washed in on me. That afternoon, I took a break from making phone calls to use the bathroom. As I was seated on the toilet, I heard something next to me. It was as if something had brushed against the sink, an ever so subtle sound. My heart rate rose and my brow furrowed as I strained to listen closer. All I could hear was my pulse throbbing in my ears. Suddenly, a wall clock in the living room chimed 4 o'clock, startling me to the point that I jumped up slightly while still sitting there. I regained my composure, washed up, and returned to the computer to transcribe the data from my phone surveys. I closed the laptop and went to make dinner at 6:30 p.m. Over the years, I had learned to be extra careful when dealing with hot ovens and burners. Once I had accidentally set a plastic plate directly onto a burner that was still hot, resulting in a cloud of nauseous fumes that lasted for days. Long after I had finished cleaning up the mess, I was lucky that had burned itself out and the damage wasn't any worse. After that close call, I bought a small fire extinguisher to keep on the countertop next to the oven. On this particular night, I made my dinner without any risk of fire. However, the undertaking was completely without incident. As I proceeded to make dinner, I discovered that the canned goods I needed for the recipe were missing from the cupboard. I have always kept my canned goods in this very specific place on the shelf so that I would always know what was what without the benefit of being able to see the labels. I don't remember using up the items I needed that night, but apparently I already had, so I opted to make a casserole instead. I sat at the dinner table enjoying the simple meal I had made. The television was playing in the background, filling me in on the day news headlines, I suppose. I finished the first portion on my plate and reached to dip into the casserole dish once more. I scraped the inside of the dish and the sounds of metal on ceramic echoing throughout the kitchen. It was empty. I can't believe it. I couldn't have already eaten it all, I said incredulously. I had thought for sure that I'd prepared a bigger portion than that, and I didn't even remember emptying the dish fully onto my plate. Thoughts ran through my head in an attempt to reason out the matter. Had it baked up to be less than I anticipated? Had I spilled some on the table while dishing into it? In search of the missing food, I placed the palm of my hand on the tabletop and moved it steadily over the area within my reach. As I was doing so, there was a distinct movement in front of me. I gasped, my heart rate immediately quickened. I felt the blood pulsing through my neck. This sound was not as subtle as the others I'd been hearing. It was obvious, a sudden motion of something moving across from me. I continued listening, but all I could hear was the much too chipper weatherman on the TV giving the forecast. Silence. Suddenly, I was overwhelmed with the feeling that I was no longer alone at the kitchen table. "Is someone there?" I called out, hoping there was no reply. Silence. I felt a shift in the air pressure as if something moved behind me, followed by the creak of a floorboard. I froze. Something brushed against the back of my hair, gentle as a feather. I recoiled and let out a squeal. I shot up out of my chair, made my way to the corner of the kitchen, and turned to face the interior of the room. "Who's there?" I demanded. No answer. By this time, I was breathing heavily, practically hyperventilating. My chest and throat radiated with heat as my heart raced inside, giving me the sensation of an acute indigestion. I thought I might vomit. I slowly made my way to the doorway leading into the living room. I stood there for what seemed like an eternity, listening for something, anything that would explain this circumstance. Eventually, I moved on and worked my way into the hallway bathroom. I locked the door behind me. It took over an hour and a half for me to calm down. While in the locked bathroom, I wrestled with my thoughts. I reasoned with myself. I didn't want to admit that my mother was right, but maybe I shouldn't be living alone. It appeared to be taking its toll on me. On the other hand, all of these things could be logically explained. I told myself if I wasn't blind, I'd seen whatever it was that caused the noises, and it would be so obvious. I'd laugh about how ridiculous it was to be scared of them. I'm sure. At least that's what I tried to convince myself. What finally brought me out of the bathroom was the ringing of the telephone. I admit it startled me at first, but only because it had been so quiet for the past 2 hours. I cautiously opened the door and entered the hallway. My phone was in the living room. I approached it quickly and answered. Hello? Hey Sarah, it's Jill. Thank God it was my friend Jill. Hey Jill, how's it going? Oh, I'm good. I saw you at Espresso Express today, she said in a playful tone, which I didn't understand initially. You did? Mm-hmm. I saw you in the window when I walked by on the sidewalk, still in a playful tone. Well, why didn't you come in and say hi? I asked. Well, I didn't want to disturb you. Disturb me? Why would you be disturbing me? Because, silly. I assumed you were on a date. Who's the lucky guy that was sitting with you? My mouth slacked open. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't form words. Sarah? Jill asked. Are you okay? I dropped the phone. I could still hear Jill's muffled voice even through the speaker was face down on the carpet. I frantically made my way around the house, arms flailing in front of me. Who are you? I yelled in the house. What do you want? I was terrified but also angry. I felt violated. I didn't necessarily want to encounter whatever it was, but I couldn't go on hiding in my own house any longer. I spent hours searching every square inch of the property and found nothing. I finally went to bed after I was able to calm down, but I did not fall asleep until the wee hours of the morning. A light rustling sound woke me not long after I had fallen asleep, still in the dark hours of the early morning. I wasn't sure at first if it was real or had I dreamt the noise. As I was about to get up, I noticed that the sheets next to me were pulled back. I stretched out my right arm into the empty space beside me. It felt warm, as if someone had been lying there with me. The events of the previous day flooded back into my memory. My sightless eyes welled up with tears as I began to question my own sanity. Frustrated, I bottled up out of bed. I threw on some old clothes and headed towards the front door with the intention of fleeing the house, unsure exactly where I was going to go. Maybe Jill's place? She lived fairly close. I wanted to take my cane with me as I'd always did whenever I went outdoors. I searched the house frantically, unable to remember where I'd left it. I almost always left it propped against the wall by the front door, but it wasn't there. I made my way along all the perimeter walls, feeling desperately for my cane. When I neared the kitchen, I still had not found my walking aid, but I made a discovery of much more startling nature. A barely detectable vertical crevice in the wall I had not known about previously. I used my fingers to follow the crease up the wall, across the top, and down the other side. It was a doorway, designed to fit perfectly flush within the wall. I leaned my weight inward against the panel and felt a slight give on its right side. I worked my fingers into the crevice on the side the best I could, eventually prying the panel free. It swung open to the left. I gasped in shock. My pulse quickened. A hidden room right in the center of my house. How I wish that I would have had sight in that moment. I faced a completely unexplored territory inside my own house with the possibility that someone else was in there with me. I entered slowly, arms extended. Is someone there? I whispered, afraid to ask the question. There was no response. I stepped forward. To the right, I discovered a flat surface, a tabletop. I ran my hands along its surface. On the top of the table, I was able to make out several unopened cans of food. No doubt, these were the missing cans I'd been looking for. The table also contained silverware and a can opener that disappeared weeks ago. My heart raced. My heart rate increased even more, and my palms began to sweat. I worked my way forward until I came to a wall that I knew bordered the living room. I found a hole the size of a quarter at eye level. Sweat began to form on my brow as well. I found another similar hole on the wall, adjacent to the wall. The wall bordered the bathroom. Tears started to well up in my eyes. I was able to find 2 more holes on the 2 remaining walls bordering the kitchen and the bedroom. I dropped to my knees in absolute horror and disbelief. How long had this person been watching me? How could I have not known? My hands were on the floor in front of me and I felt something soft. I investigated further with my fingerprints. It was some sort of comforter or sleeping bag. At one end was a fluffy pillow. At this point, not only was I terrified beyond description, I was also furious. How dare someone spy on me, covertly from within my own walls? I knew I had to run out of the house and get to safety immediately, with or without my cane. I decided I would go to Jill's and we would call the police from there. I made my way to where I remember the hidden door to be, my arms sweeping the area ahead of me in a panic. Instead of the open door, my hands found the warm torso of a human male, standing silently in the doorway. He grabbed both my arms and pulled me out of the hidden room and into the house. We struggled into the kitchen. I kicked at him and screamed as loud as I could into his ears. I was able to get one of my arms free, and I used it to grasp for the fire extinguisher that I knew would be by the oven. He attempted to pull me away, but my fingers reached its nozzle. I swung it at him, feeling the metal cylinder connect with the back of his skull. He released my other arm, and I pulled the trigger in his direction, enveloping him in a cloud of white foam. I ran into the utility room off of the kitchen where I knew my only advantage existed, the fuse box. I found the box and tripped every lever I could find, eliminating all power from the house. If this perverted psycho wanted to kill me, he was going to have to do it on equal playing field. In the dark, the intruder had not followed me into the utility room. The fire extinguisher must have dazed him. I remember the toolbox I kept in that room, and I quickly retrieved the longest screwdriver I could find. I stood in the corner and listened carefully. If he was still conscious, he would not be able to move in the pitch darkness without creating noise. I would surely detect his movements. I held the screwdriver against my chest, gripping its handle tightly with both hands. I felt my wildly beating heart against the side of my fist. After an eternity, I moved forward a bit. I may have knocked him out or even killed him. I had to make sure. I left the utility room and entered the kitchen. There was still no sound from anywhere in the house. I passed into the living room and headed towards the front door. Halfway through the room, I could feel his presence. Something in the air around me had shifted. Without warning, there was a breath on the back of my neck, followed by a deep whisper in my ear directly. The showers were my favorites. I screamed and swung around, stabbing the screwdriver into empty air. I ran for the door. It was merely a few feet away, but I couldn't reach it due to the resistance I met by the voyeuristic brute's arms wrapped against my waist. He wrestled me to the floor and straddled me. I tightened my grip on the tool and plunged it as hard as I could into his side. I shuddered to think about it when I recount the feeling of the steel shaft separating his 2 ribs. It was horrid. and I was only able to stomach it, knowing that if I hadn't acted, my life would have ended right then and there. The man winced in pain and let out a deep growling grunt. He fell backward and rolled off of me. I turned onto my chest and pushed off of the floor, then crawled over to the couch and used it to get back up to my feet. I still held the screwdriver in hand, a warm trickle of blood seeping onto my knuckle. I couldn't tell that the intruder was riffling. I could tell the intruder was riffling around on the floor near the doorway. I would have to exit through the back door from the opposite end of the living room. I entered the sunroom where the door was located. I wasn't familiar with the entry point causing me to fumble around with the deadbolt in the screen door locks for longer than what I would have liked. I knew there were concrete stairs that led to a flat patio. How many steps? 4? 5? I couldn't remember. I proceeded slowly. The last thing I needed was to fall and twist my ankle. After navigating the steps, I came to the end of the patio, which emptied into a narrow alleyway between the shotgun-style houses behind mine. My steps were slow and cautious. My hands told me there was a brick wall to my right and a brick wall about 5 feet to my left, the sides of 2 houses. I was entering an unfamiliar territory without the benefit of my cane. My breathing was frantic and the tears continued to fill my useless eyes. I kicked something and nearly fell over. It was plastic. A child's toy, maybe? I was moving much too fast compared to the level of my comfort with the surroundings, but had no choice as the footsteps were approaching behind me. I picked up the pace, waving the screwdriver out in front of me to buffer my impending collisions with any obstacles. 10 more steps. 10 more feet of forward progress, and the screwdriver alerted me with it. 10 more feet of forward progress, and the screwdriver alerted me with a metallic clanging to the presence of a chain link fence connecting the 2 houses. I stopped and cried out, my voice breaking up through my tears. No. I turned around, my back to the fence. I began swinging the screwdriver violently. Leave me alone, I screamed, more hyperventilating, more tears. The man approached slowly and then stopped just a few feet away from me. I got the feeling he could see what he was doing. Either there was an electric light in this alley, or the dawn had already crested enough that the ample ambient light was available. I didn't know which one was the case, but I had no idea what time it was. Knowing I was about to die, I just wanted answers. How long? I managed to ask. How long have you been in there? My voice was more angry than I expected. Since before you lived there, he replied calmly in his deep voice. I got lucky with you, a blind girl. With the others, I couldn't come out into the open when they were home. I couldn't sit and eat their dinner with them. I couldn't stand over them while they worked at their computers. I couldn't go to the coffee shop with them. There was a pause as he moved even closer. I couldn't stand next to them in the bathroom. I cried uncontrollably in the whirlwind of emotions. I'd never before felt so violated, so angry, and so terrified all at the same time. There was a sudden movement again in front of me. Don't touch me, I demanded as I held up the screwdriver. I don't know exactly how it happened. I don't know if he didn't see the tour or just didn't care, knowing that he was caught. But as he lunged forward, he managed to impale himself on the screwdriver and pin me up against the fence. My hands were still gripping the handle, but it was so deep inside him that his shirt was touching my fist. His breathing became gurgled, and his last words to me were, I couldn't snuggle next to them in bed either. We collapsed together as one unit. The fence tore at my back as we slid down onto the ground. His dead weight nearly crushed me, but I managed to push him off and crawl away. I crawled all the way back to my house and through the back door into the living room to my phone. I sobbed hysterically as I keyed in the digits 911 and fell to the floor. Wow. Alright, that was a 30-minute story. That was a strong story. Now, I read that, my mind was all over the place because, like I said, I read that before the stream, prior to the stream, because I read it in another, and the stream just cut out on me. But yeah, that's fucking crazy. I mean, being blind and having somebody watch you almost reminded me of the movie The Boy, and then another movie called Hush. So I definitely think there was an inspiration between those two movies that gave Moonlit Cove the idea to do Blindness. Really great story, really well written, and really crazy twist. Honestly, I wasn't expecting that. I mean, obviously when I first read it, but it was nice right then and there. All right, let's go to another. So now we're doing a little bit of different. Before we were reading some stories, and I just felt like they weren't really that great. Let's try locations and sites, rituals. Let's try locations and sites. Give me 1 second, my friends. Like I said, this is going to be going for an hour. I'm going to be doing these streams probably as much as I can for an hour and all that fun stuff. So I'm so tired. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be doing locations and sites. Hopefully this doesn't take the whole rest of the stream. But let's see if we can find something. The crawl space. The door, portraits. It has no face. Oh, joy. Okay. Well, I think we're just gonna do this one, and then we're gonna end the night off like I normally do. I normally tell like a personal scary story of myself. So we're gonna do one more. This is It Has No Face, made in 2015. That seems so long ago. And this story gets credited to I don't see who it gets credited to, but it's somebody. I'll apologize if I don't really know who, but also too, I don't know, this is gonna be a long one. All right, It Has No Face, and to Unknown, this is for you. Everyone has tales about the strange and bizarre. My story is about how my half-whole mass saved my life. It continues to save my life to this very day. Late in December, I was traveling north from California to my home state of Oregon. Nothing fancy, I was just going to visit my family for the holidays. On my way north, I hit a small snowstorm. Nothing awful, just a lot of snow falling at once. I wasn't worried about small increase of snow at first, considering I had snow tires installed before my long journey home. I did, however, get a little hesitant to drive when the snow started to really come down. The large amount of falling snow, coupled with the large amount of already littering the ground as I traveled higher and higher into the mountains, caused me to consider finding a place to stay for the night. I figured I could get some sleep while the storm passes over, that the fact that I could give my car's heater a break before I decided to burst into flames, or worse, just stop working altogether. I scanned as much of the landscape as I could, but there was no buildings in the immediate area. The only other option that I had for my predicament was to